The war between Russia and Ukraine has now entered its third year, marked by unprecedented drone assaults and mounting strategic tension. While Russia escalates its attacks, Ukraine stands its ground, but the cost is rising. With peace talks stalling and global stakes intensifying, the question remains: are we approaching a decisive turning point? Or is this conflict destined to stretch on, deeper, longer, and deadlier? One. Russia launches largest drone assault to date. Event overview. On the night of May 17th into May 18th, Russia launched the largest drone assault since the beginning of the war, deploying a total of 273 unmanned aerial vehicles UAVs, including Shate suicide drones Iranian-made, de-escalation drones designed to overwhelm Ukraine's air defenses. UAVs launched from multiple directions, including Bryansk, Kursk, Oryol, Rostov, and Krasnodar. Targets and tactics. This assault was not just a kinetic attack, it was a strategic, psychological, and electronic warfare operation. Primary targets: urban centers, Kiev, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, Donetsk. Military infrastructure and energy facilities. Aim to exhaust and overwhelm Ukrainian air defense systems. Layered tactic: deco drones flew first to trigger early radar responses. Shate drones followed low and erratic flight paths to avoid detection. Some drones flew in twin formations to overload interception capacity. Ukraine's defense response. According to Ukraine's general staff, 88 drones were shot down, 128 drones disappeared from radar or penetrated defenses. Some UAVs caused direct damage in Kiev, killing at least one civilian and injuring several others. While Ukraine's air defense has improved, the sheer scale of this attack caused serious strain, leaving several cities under continuous overnight alerts. Strategic implications. Testing and expanding asymmetric warfare. Russia is maximizing the use of low-cost, mass-produced drones to undermine Ukraine's high-value defense infrastructure. Psychological warfare. Constant nighttime buzzing, sirens, and isolated explosions are creating a climate of chronic anxiety for civilians. Setting up future offensives, this could be a prelude to larger missile strikes or coordinated ground offensives in hotspots like Kharkiv, Lyman, or Torets. The drone assault of May 17 to 18 is a clear signal that Russia is escalating its use of asymmetric warfare, utilizing flexibility and volume to erode Ukraine's air defense capacity without relying on more expensive cruise or ballistic missiles. Without stronger Western air defense support, Ukraine may soon face technological asymmetry that could shift momentum in Russia's favor. Two. Russia plans ICBM test launch. Event overview. According to Ukraine's military intelligence agency IGR, Russia plans to conduct a test launch of the Rs-2 intercontinental ballistic missile (ICBM) on May 19, 2025, from a site in Sverdlovsk Oblast, located in the Ural region. The Rs-2 has a range of over 10,000 kilometers and is capable of carrying multiple independently targetable nuclear warheads (MIRVs). It is specifically designed to penetrate US and NATO missile defense systems. Strategic purpose. Although framed as a routine technical exercise, the launch carries deep strategic messaging. Deterrence toward the West and Ukraine. Russia is sending a clear signal that it retains nuclear leverage, a reminder to adversaries not to overstep. Demonstration of strategic capabilities. Testing an ICBM during heightened military conflict serves as a soft show of force, not an attack, but psychological and political pressure. Domestic distraction and assertion. Amid economic sanctions and battlefield setbacks, this move may also serve to bolster a strongman image internally. Global impact. International alarm and scrutiny. Even if conducted within legal frameworks, any ICBM test in wartime triggers global concern, especially among NATO nations. Expected Western response. Countries like the US, UK and Germany are likely to issue condemnations and increase satellite and aerial surveillance of Russian strategic sites. Risk of miscalculation. Without prior notification or transparency, such a launch could be mistaken as preparation for a nuclear strike, violating trust under arms control agreements. This launch does not suggest an imminent nuclear strike, but it reinforces Russia's intent to keep strategic deterrence on the negotiation table. It reflects how, as the ground war in Ukraine stagnates, Moscow pivots toward asymmetric tools, from drones and cyber attacks to nuclear signaling, to maintain political leverage. Russia's planned Rs-24 ICBM test is a symbolic and psychological maneuver rather than preparation for war, a geopolitical statement dressed as a technical exercise. When the battlefield stalls, Russia looks to the skies, not to strike, but to remind the world it still holds the keys to destruction. Three. Progress on the Eastern Front. Latest developments. In recent weeks, Russia has made notable tactical gains on the eastern front of Ukraine, particularly in the following areas. Batyr Zaporizhia region. Russian forces claim full control of this village, expanding a potential corridor connecting Donetsk to the southern front. Borova and Toretsk Kharkiv Donetsk line. Intense fighting continues as Russia attempts to encircle and cut off Ukrainian positions. Lyman-Siversk. Ukraine has launched targeted counterattacks, though with limited territorial success so far. Strategic significance. Russia is capitalizing on Ukraine's shortage of ammunition and heavy weapons, especially as Western aid has been delayed. These small but steady advances allow Russian troops to erode Ukraine's defensive lines and apply psychological pressure on local commanders. The broader goal appears to be preparing the ground for a larger offensive push, should Ukrainian defenses weaken further in the summer. Challenges for Ukraine. Although Ukraine continues active defensive operations, it faces growing strain from manpower shortages and equipment deficits, especially in hotspots like Chasiv Yar and Toretsk. Counteroffensive capabilities are currently limited due to lack of tanks, drones, and long-range missiles. Without a significant influx of Western support in the coming month, there's an increasing risk of localized defensive collapses. Russia has not achieved a strategic breakthrough, but it is slowly chipping away at Ukraine's eastern defenses. Ukraine is resisting with determination, but urgently needs military aid to hold the line as summer 2025 approaches. Four. Istanbul talks yield no breakthrough. Overview of the event. In mid-May 2025, Russia and Ukraine held their first direct negotiations since 2022 in Istanbul, Turkey. Mediated by the United Nations and Turkey, the talks were expected to lay groundwork for a potential humanitarian ceasefire, a large-scale prisoner exchange, discussions on occupied territories. However, after 2 days of closed-door meetings, no breakthrough was achieved. Key reasons for the deadlock. Demanded that Ukraine accept the new territorial reality, including the loss of Crimea and for annexed regions. Insisted that these areas are no longer up for negotiation. Declared it would not accept any deal that compromises sovereignty. Prioritized full territorial restoration and justice for war crimes. What was achieved? Very little. Both sides agreed to exchange 1,000 prisoners of war. Committed to not targeting verified humanitarian convoys. However, no joint statement was issued, and no follow-up meetings were scheduled. Global reactions. The UN and EU expressed disappointment, but welcomed the fact that both parties were willing to sit at the same table. US President Donald Trump, incumbent, offered to personally intervene via separate calls with Putin and Zelensky. International observers warned, if the first direct talks in 3 years end in deadlock, then the road to peace is still long and uncertain. Strategic assessment. Russia may be using negotiations as a delay tactic and distraction, while continuing its drone strikes and eastern offensives. Ukraine cannot accept current terms without losing legitimacy at home and abroad. As a result, diplomatic efforts remain symbolic, not yet substantive. The Istanbul meeting was a small window of hope, quickly shut again, with neither side ready to make strategic concessions. Every negotiation table becomes merely a pause between artillery strikes. 5. President Trump pushes for peace initiative. Event overview. On May 19, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump, in his second term, announced plans to hold direct phone calls with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, promote a temporary ceasefire, aiming to pave the way for a more realistic negotiation framework, act as a political intermediary, outside of formal UN or NATO channels. Objectives of Trump's peace initiative: de-escalate immediate military tensions, particularly following Russia's record-breaking drone strikes. Secure mutual commitments to stop attacks on civilian infrastructure. Launch a new round of leader-level negotiations, possibly hosted in a neutral countries such as Hungary or India. Strategic motivation and intent. Domestic U.S. politics. Trump seeks to project himself as a global peacemaker ahead of the U.S. midterm elections. Offers a contrasting approach to the previous administration's strategy of extended military support. Foreign policy. Global role of the U.S. Reinforces the U.S. as the central diplomatic player, preventing China or Turkey from dominating mediation efforts. Demonstrates Trump's ability to exert direct influence over both Kyiv and Moscow. International response. Ukraine responded with caution, expressing doubt over Trump's impartiality. Russia has not officially replied, but intensified military strikes shortly after, suggesting no willingness to ease pressure. EU and NATO expressed concern that Trump's plan could lead to territorial concessions by Ukraine in exchange for a quick peace. Realistic barriers. The positions of both sides remain irreconcilable. Ukraine refuses to cede territory. Russia refuses to retreat from Donbas and Crimea. A sustainable ceasefire requires third-party verification, likely involving the UN or OSCE. Ukraine fears that any temporary peace could give Russia time to regroup and strengthen forces. President Trump's peace initiative is a symbolic political gesture with international weight, but lacks the conditions necessary to generate a breakthrough. As shells continue to fall and drones fill the skies over Ukraine, words alone must be matched with enforceable action. Outlook and concerns. Current battlefield landscape. As the war enters its third year, neither Russia nor Ukraine has achieved a decisive breakthrough, yet the intensity and scope of the conflict continue to escalate. Russia has intensified its use of suicide drones, heavy artillery, and nuclear signaling. Ukraine continues to defend valiantly, but faces growing shortages in weapons, ammunition, and manpower. Peace negotiations remain stalled, and both time and losses now tilt toward long-term danger. Key concerns. Risk of prolonged war. Ukrainian military leaders warned that the war could drag on for years without sustained and large-scale Western support. The current stalemate is causing heavy casualties and destruction, with neither side able to deliver a finishing blow. Danger of a false peace. A temporary ceasefire if reached could ease international pressure, but allow Russia to regroup, resupply, and prepare for future offensives. Ukraine fears a scenario of halftime in a prolonged war rather than a true end to hostilities. Waning Western support. Some Western nations are showing signs of fatigue or wavering financial commitment. Political changes in the US, EU, or NATO could slow the flow of weapons, aid, and defensive systems. Broader risks and global impact. If the war continues, the risk of spillover into NATO-adjacent regions like Poland or Moldova rises significantly. Global food and energy supply chains remain vulnerable to prolonged disruption. The refugee crisis and rising war fatigue will increase social strain across Europe. Short-term forecast. Summer 2025 will likely be a turning point. Either Ukraine receives accelerated aid and stabilizes its defenses, or Russia gradually gains ground. There's a high probability of tactical breakthroughs by Russia in areas such as Kharkiv, Toretsk, or Zaporizhia. If Ukraine withstands these offensives and holds the line, it may prepare for a renewed strategic counteroffensive in late 2025 or early 2026. This war is no longer just a regional conflict, it is now a global strategic challenge. With peace still out of reach and neither side willing to compromise, every hope is now shadowed by very real and immediate risks. Conclusion: the war in Ukraine has long surpassed the borders of a single nation. It has become the greatest test of collective will, strategic endurance, and the limits of compromise in the 21st century. Though peace continues to be spoken of in conferences and headlines, on the ground, the guns have not gone silent. Ukraine still stands, but with each passing day, the cost grows heavier. Western fatigue, Moscow's defiance, and the despair of civilians all paint a dangerous picture. No progress, no clear way out. In the months ahead, the world will face a stark choice: accept a drawn-out war with growing risks of escalation, or act more decisively to bring it to an end, one that is just, sustainable, and truly worthy of being called peace. Thank you for watching the whole video. Please follow the channel to watch more great videos.